Usually, when we conceptualize a natural disaster, our minds immediately go straight to the epicenter.
Right, like that bright red bullseye on a map.
Exactly, the point of maximum concentrated impact. If it's an earthquake, you naturally imagine the fault line, the ruptured ground, that immediate radius of destruction.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's entirely human nature to focus on ground zero. We're just visually and psychologically drawn to that primary point of kinetic release.
Right. But today, on the deep dive, we are deliberately ignoring that bullseye. We are looking out at the extreme periphery.
Which is often where the most fascinating ripple effects happen.
Exactly. We're going to explore how a massive geological event in one specific country ends up putting very specific pieces of zinc and wood onto roofs in an entirely different region.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. Welcome in, everyone. We are thrilled you've joined us today. Our mission for this session is to unpack a short but incredibly dense narrative about, well, invisible causality, the true nature of vulnerability, and the economics of a highly localized response to a crisis.
It's a remarkable case study in cause and effect. It really illustrates just how tightly bound regional ecosystems are, even when those threads connecting them seem totally invisible to us.
Yeah, and before we really get into the weeds here, I want to set the parameters for you listening. Our sole source text for today is a concise report detailing a recent humanitarian intervention led by an opposition leader.
And we should be very clear about our approach here.
Yes, absolutely. We are putting all partisan politics completely aside today. I want to stress that our objective is not to endorse or, evaluate any political figure. Instead, we're using this text as a clinical case study. We are strictly examining the raw, unbiased mechanics of this specific crisis, the supply chain of the aid, and just the facts as they're laid out.
Yeah, because stripping away the political context, it allows us to focus purely on the anatomy of the disaster response itself. We can analyze the structural efficiency of the intervention rather than getting bogged down in the politics behind it.
Spot on. So let's get right into this wildly surprising chain of events. The source tracks a crisis that originates with an earthquake in neighboring Venezuela.
Right, the macro event.
But the ultimate fallout of that earthquake is a localized relief effort involving zinc sheets, rafters, and an entire month's salary to help over 30 families on the Essequibo Coast in Region 2 of Guyana.
The trajectory is really what makes this text so compelling. The origin point is unequivocally identified as the Venezuelan earthquake.
But the destruction for those families wasn't from the ground shaking.
Exactly. The destruction experienced on the Essequibo Coast wasn't the tremor itself.
The damage in Region 2 was actually the result of a severe atmospheric storm that followed in the immediate wake of that earthquake. Wait, I actually have to stop you right there because I need you to explain this to me.
Sure, yeah.
I understand an earthquake violently shaking the crust of the earth, right? But how does shaking dirt and rock create a rainstorm in the sky? It feels so scientifically disconnected. Walk me through the actual physics here.
I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive. But the geosphere and the atmosphere are deeply coupled systems.
Okay.
When a massive tectonic shift occurs, it doesn't just release kinetic energy horizontally through the rock. It also releases immense energy vertically. Think of the ground acting like a giant continent-sized speaker cone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when it shudders, it thrusts upward and downward, generating these massive acoustic gravity waves that launch straight up into the atmosphere.
Wait, so the physical shaking of the earth is literally punching the air above it?
Essentially, yes. In seismically active maritime or coastal regions, this sudden displacement of gigantic columns of air, often combined with the release of geothermal heat from the crust, it can violently alter local pressure gradients.
So it messes with the air pressure.
Exactly. It creates severe barometric instability. You end up with sudden low-pressure voids, and the surrounding atmosphere just rushes in to fill that void. That rapid equalization triggers aggressive condensation, high winds, and severe cyclonic activity.
That's incredible.
The earthquake is the match. The atmospheric storm is the ensuing fire.
Man, it's like a localized power surge on a regional grid. Like a transformer blows in one neighborhood, but because the entire electrical grid is interconnected, a house 3 towns over gets its motherboard fried by the spike, the power lines just carry the chaos forward.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize it. And what this reveals about macro-level vulnerability is profound.
How so?
Well, we draw these rigid lines on our maps to designate national borders, right?
Mm-hmm.
But thermodynamics and atmospheric pressure systems possess zero respect for political geography. Vulnerability in this context is entirely imported.
Imported vulnerability, I like that phrase. The people in the Essequibo Coast were not the primary targets of the geological rupture. They were far from the epicenter.
Yet they absorb the devastating secondary impact. It forces us to reevaluate how regional climates operate. A seismic anomaly over there undergoes a physical metamorphosis and becomes a life-threatening atmospheric crisis right here.
Which means standard disaster preparedness is kind of inherently flawed if it only accounts for localized threats. You might reinforce your foundation to withstand a tremor, only to have your roof ripped off by a sudden wind shear generated by that exact same tremor hundreds of miles away.
Precisely.
So if this barometric void dumps a massive storm over Region 2, we have to look at what that storm actually hit, because a weather event is only as disastrous as the infrastructure it encounters.
Yeah, the baseline conditions of the affected population dictate the severity of the disaster. Natural events do not exert their force equally across demographics.
Yeah, and our source text highlights a staggering detail about the 30-plus families in the path of this storm. I actually want to read this exact description because it requires us to rethink our standard disaster terminology.
Go for it.
It states that prior to the intervention, some of these beneficiaries were living in extremely poor conditions, quote, with little more than 4 posts and plastic serving as shelter, end quote.
Yeah, 4 posts and plastic. That paints a very stark picture of their baseline reality.
I really struggle with the traditional language used around disaster relief in contexts like this. You know, the text later uses the word rebuilding, which is the standard bureaucratic term.
Right.
But if a family is literally living under 4 wooden posts and a sheet of plastic, the storm didn't just damage a home.
No, because the concept of rebuilding implies the existence of a prior foundational structure.
Right.
You know, a concrete slab, load-bearing walls, a secured roof.
Right. You can't rebuild what was never built. If the starting point was just scavenged plastic and posts, a severe storm doesn't just cause property damage. It entirely erases the only fragile microenvironment keeping those people alive.
And this forces a crucial distinction in how we quantify the sociology of disaster impact. Consider a severe storm passing over a highly developed, affluent neighborhood.
Okay.
It might tear off some expensive shingles, shatter a few windows, maybe knock down a fence. It's undoubtedly frightening and financially costly, but the fundamental structural integrity of the home usually remains intact.
They still have walls.
Exactly. The inhabitants are still shielded from the elements that night.
But for the families in Region 2, there's no structural buffer to absorb that kinetic energy.
Right. For a family whose only barrier against the environment is a sheet of plastic, a 50-mile-per-hour gust of wind completely obliterates their existence. It turns a severe weather anomaly into an immediate localized apocalypse.
It's just devastating.
The extreme pre-existing poverty acts as a lethal amplifier here. The storm didn't create the vulnerability. The storm exploited a profound structural deficit that was already there.
It's not just a storm hitting a coastline, it's a storm systematically finding and dismantling the most exposed, unprotected people on that coastline. And if the baseline infrastructure is that non-existent, then standard bureaucratic disaster response is probably going to fail them too.
Right, because of the time factor.
Exactly. These people don't have the luxury of time to wait for a committee assessment.
Which is why the mechanics of the specific intervention detailed in the source are so worthy of analysis. The methodology used here bypasses traditional channels entirely.
Yeah, let's get into that. The report states that the opposition leaders stepped in by taking a very specific financial action. They donated their entire May month salary to fund humanitarian works for this specific group of affected families.
An entire month's personal income. Not a fractional pledge, not a diversion of funds from a larger municipal budget, but a direct, localized injection of personal capital.
Now, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
We always hear that disaster relief should be handled by massive NGOs because they have the scale, the logistics, and the purchasing power. Why is an individual converting their personal salary into aid more effective in this specific scenario than writing a check to a massive international relief fund?
It really comes down to the economic principle of frictionless aid versus administrative overhead. Massive NGOs are vital for macro-scale disasters, definitely. But they operate with tremendous logistical friction.
Makes sense.
When money enters a massive general fund, it triggers a chain of bureaucracy. Needs assessments must be filed, procurement committees have to meet, international supply chains must be activated. That creates a massive temporal lag,
The lag time. Yeah.
a delay of weeks or even months. And as we just established, when a family's shelter of posts and plastic is destroyed, a lag time of 3 weeks is biologically and psychologically unsustainable.
You just can't wait.
Exactly. What this intervention demonstrates is supply chain immediacy.
Because the source text gives us the itemized receipt, basically. It lists exactly what that May salary purchased. The capital wasn't absorbed by abstract administrative costs. It bought zinc sheets, rafters, tarpaulins, plastic, and foundational building materials.
It is the instantaneous conversion of abstract financial capital into tangible physical assets.
It's the concept of micro-interventions and mutual aid, Instead of a politician sending thoughts and prayers or funneling money into a bureaucratic void that might eventually result in a generic care package.
Right.
This intervention looked directly at the localized deficit. It's the difference between a blank check and showing up in a neighbor's yard with a toolbox and lumber.
And if you look closely at that itemized list, there's a profound one-to-one economic correlation at play. Think about the vulnerabilities we just analyzed.
The 4 posts and plastic.
Exactly. Purchasing tarpaulins, plastic, zinc sheets, and rafters directly targets that specific structural deficit. Providing rafters and zinc sheets isn't just a replacement of what the storm took.
No.
It's actually providing the foundational hardware to upgrade that baseline of survival. It represents an exact, perfectly tailored response to the highly localized demand.
It's diagnostic aid. You aren't shipping crates of generic winter coats to a tropical climate just because you have surplus in a warehouse. You are looking at the specific debris field, identifying the exact missing structural components, and purchasing only those components.
Which drastically increases the efficiency of the capital. Every single dollar of that May salary was utilized to directly alter the physical reality of those 30 families. There was zero economic bleed.
And that economic efficiency directly impacts how the aid is experienced by the people on the ground. The source text notes that the beneficiaries expressed deep gratitude. But crucially, they didn't just say, "Thank you for the zinc."
No, they didn't.
They specifically expressed gratitude for the, quote, immediate assistance and support as they began to rebuild.
Immediate assistance.
Yeah.
That modifier is perhaps the most important word in the entire report.
I really want you listening to genuinely imagine the physiological and psychological stress of this situation. You were already living on the absolute margins, relying on scavenged plastic to keep the rain off your family.
Right.
And then an invisible shockwave from another country spawns a storm that shreds your shelter to pieces. You are standing in the mud with zero physical barriers between you and a hostile environment. In that moment, the speed of the help is arguably more critical than the overall scale of it.
You are touching on the critical concept of psychological stabilization in disaster recovery. When a catastrophic event occurs, particularly one that completely strips away basic shelter, it violently removes human agency.
You're just reduced to a passive entity. You are entirely at the mercy of physics.
Yes, you are rendered powerless by forces entirely outside of your control. First, the geological shock wave, then the atmospheric anomaly. And the psychological trauma of that profound powerlessness often outlasts the physical damage.
Wow, yeah.
You enter a state of learned helplessness, basically waiting in the rubble for an external bureaucracy to process your tragedy.
But if the intervention is immediate, if those tangible materials arrive almost instantly.
It intercepts that trauma.
Yeah.
Immediate assistance provides much more than just a physical barrier against the rain. Fast-arriving rafters and zinc sheets hand the agency back to the victims.
That's so powerful.
It allows them to transition immediately from passive victims of an imported disaster to active participants in their own recovery.
They aren't waiting for a clipboard assessment. They can pick up a hammer and physically begin securing their microenvironment on day one.
Exactly. The rapid velocity of the supply chain delivery is the exact mechanism that enables that vital psychological shift. The physical building materials are merely the tools used to rebuild their autonomy.
So stepping back to look at the entire picture, this short report took us on a massive journey today. We began by demystifying the physics of how a kinetic seismic event in Venezuela thrust energy into the atmosphere, creating a low-pressure void that birthed a severe storm.
A textbook demonstration of how vulnerability is imported across political borders.
Totally. We analyzed the extreme structural deficit of the 30-plus families affected, understanding how pre-existing extreme poverty acts as a lethal amplifier for weather anomalies. And finally, we broke down the frictionless economics of a direct intervention. We saw how converting a single month's salary directly into hyper-specific hardware, zinc, and rafters bypassed bureaucratic lag time, delivering the immediate assistance necessary to restore human agency.
It is a stunningly complex chain of physical, sociological, and economic events, all contained within a single localized crisis.
For you listening, we hope this exploration forces you to look differently at the invisible supply chains of consequence happening around us every second. It's incredibly easy to see a headline about a geological event or a crisis across a border and assume your local ecosystem is insulated.
And it rarely is.
Right. The thermodynamic and economic ripples always find a shore. At the same time, this text proves that highly targeted, frictionless action meeting and exact localized demand with immediate physical supply can entirely alter the trajectory of a disaster.
It really illuminates the raw mechanics required to establish a baseline of survival when none previously existed.
To wrap up our deep dive today, I want to hand it over for one final piece of analysis. We've meticulously broken down the physics and the supply chain of this aid, but there is a lingering macroeconomic question here.
There is, and it's something I really want you to critically evaluate long after you finish listening. Consider the stark, inescapable math of this specific intervention. If the entirety of a single month's salary from one individual is mathematically sufficient to purchase the foundational physical hardware, the zinc, the wood, the tarpaulins, necessary to help more than 30 families establish basic shelter from the elements.
Yeah.
What does that severe ratio reveal to you about the true, surprisingly low, ground-level cost of basic human survival? And how does that reality contrast with the massive, often incomprehensibly funded scale of our broader political economies that still allow four-posts and plastic to exist in the first place?
Wow. That is a heavy, essential question to walk away with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.